everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate you being a part of the discussion. Before we jump in, I'd like to thank our thought partner, Everstring, for making all of this possible. Also, as you all know, we give away our profits to charity, and would like to take the opportunity to thank you all again for participating, and we will be recognizing the charities you are supporting today at the end of the discussion. With that said, I'd like to introduce you all to JJ Cardwell from Everstring, who will be leading the discussion today. JJ, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. Can you all hear me okay? I realized I need to switch to my headset as the computer audio is not my friend today. Well, good. Excellent. Again, thank you everyone for making time to do this. We have two topics that are near and dear for me, which is charitable involvement and data. So excited to always get together with a group of like-minded folks. For myself, my charity is American Breast Cancer Foundation. My mother, who's now 80, is a survivor, and it's near and dear to me, and I'm looking forward to hearing about everyone else's charities. What I was thinking as we get started is perhaps as we go around the room, everyone can just share name, company, and then just something new that you've been able to accomplish or figure out or gain perspective on during the COVID pandemic. And I'll start it off. For me, as I said, I'm CEO and co-founder of Everstring. I realized that in the first month, I was lamenting how I could no longer run because I would always run at the gym, and it took me sadly every bit of a month to realize that I don't need a treadmill to run. And then once I started running outside, I realized, wow, I actually own a bike too, that I will ride sometimes with my kids when they ride, and I started riding my own bike, and I realized all the many things I can do that don't require me to pay a subscription to go to a gym and do it during the hours when they're open. And while there have been a lot of very difficult things through this for all of us, and many more so than me, there have been some really good eye-opening realizations, just forcing myself to step out of routine and patterns that I'd ingrained over nearly 44 years, and some good things I'm going to carry forward. So with that, maybe we can go right around. Joe, do you want to kick off?
Sure. My name is Joe Dos Santos, and I'm the Chief Data Officer of Click, which is a software analytics company. And I guess the thing that I've learned most about during the pandemic is how to be creative with dinner. We once the restaurants were cut off, we all had to be much more resourceful and creative. And there's been a lot of grilling and a lot of more fun and interesting things that we're downloading from the internet.
Excellent. Good. Let's see. Rod, you want to go next?
Sure. Rod Bates. I work for Coca-Cola, and my role is to lead all things concerned with data strategy, data asset management, analytics, data science for our North American business unit. Really fun job that I really enjoy a lot. During COVID, and kind of related, JJ, to what you were saying, I learned how many steps I took when I went to the office every day, and how many I don't take.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here at home. So really the fact that I have to be more aware of, getting that exercise, getting that sort of coincidental, walking around, and somehow during the day that I was getting in the office that I'm not getting here. So I have to set some reminders and make myself do that. So that's been fun.
Sounds good. Excellent. Rachel, do you want to?
Sure. I'm Rachel Levanger, and I am the Director of Data Science at Fidelity National Financial. It's a mortgage services holding company, not in any way related to Fidelity Investments up in Boston. And so, we work with a lot of real estate data and really just starting our process of becoming a data science enabled company. For the pandemic, I have gotten crazy back into cooking. I actually used to really love cooking, but then getting right here in Brooklyn, it's much easier to just eat out at all the amazing restaurants all the time. So diving back into cooking, getting into gardening. I got a little place with a backyard here. So that's been really nice to sort of get back to the basics like that.
Excellent. Very good. All right, and Juan, you want to wrap us up here?
I'm Juan Lavista, and I'm the general manager and AI for Good and lab director for the Microsoft AI for Good Research Lab. This is part of Microsoft AI for Good initiatives. Through the pandemic, I learned how amazing is Washington State, because we spend a lot of weekends visiting. Instead of going from one birthday party to another, we had that time to dedicate to visiting a lot of the amazing parts of Washington State. So all the outdoors and all that. And another thing I learned is that I really should reduce the amount of commute time and the amount of time that I save by commuting. So I would probably, even after the pandemic, I would probably continue working from home at least a few days every week. So that's basically what I learned.
Excellent. I think a lot of the world is going to be feeling that way as well. It'll be interesting to see how much snapback there is once there's a vaccine, and how much, many parts of this country have a very short memory, and how quickly people will seek to see this as just a bad memory versus, taking some of the things we've all learned and making it part of our lives going forward. All right, well, thank you all for sharing, and again, sincere thanks for being here. I think we can jump right in into a handful of questions. I think first, what I'd love to hear is if you could talk through biggest challenge or challenges that your team's facing from a data standpoint. So biggest data challenge, and then when you think about the downstream effects, because for a lot of us, we work in data-centric parts of the org, but ultimately it flows down into different parts of the business, whether it's go-to-market or other components. So if you could talk about a major challenge and downstream effect, and maybe we'll run in the same order for this particular question. So Joe, you want to?
Yeah, sure. So I think that, if you want to be world-class at analytics or machine learning, you need to be world-class at data availability. So in a world in which we're kind of all running with the same data algorithms, there's a finite list of libraries that we can use, a finite list of techniques. What really will set people apart is their creativity and their ability to find new and interesting kinds of data. The challenge that introduces is this weird balance between availability and risk. And I think that we are coming off. We call this a third generation of business intelligence, where the first was IT controlled data flows. IT built infrastructure and they took everything, and then that was really, it took a long time to develop something you didn't really like very much. And that gave way to the second generation, which is in many respects a free-for-all. Everyone goes and grabs data from wherever they can find it and puts it to use locally, and that's no good either. And we think that the third generation is related to this governing of data, and even raw data, and to provide the nourishment for these ML models. So the real challenge that we have is, how do you create an inventory and a catalog of data that at once enables the business, and then also protects and restricts the availability of that for people that really shouldn't see things. And that requires a lot of sophisticated looking at that, and it's a mix of policy and technology and all sorts of things. And if you don't do that right, you might as well starve your analytics group to death, because they're going to really have a hard time doing anything that's anything but the most kind of boring kind of analytics that they've already done before.
Yeah, great point. Makes a lot of sense, and consistent with what I've seen across a lot of organizations where, in the early days of adoption of ML, there was really a rush to just build teams and build capabilities specifically around ML. And then that crisis that happened, whether it was 1 year later or 3 years in, where folks said, holy cow, the ML capabilities are largely converging. So much of the differentiation is going to be at the data layer, and that's really our bigger problem. And for a lot of applications, the data swamps. I mean, the impact of bad data swamping whatever could really be accomplished at the ML layer. Okay, great. That's helpful. Rod, you want to?
There, that's even more acute in regulated industries, right? So if you work in healthcare, there is a kind of a force that's working against you to getting your hands on data that people are a little bit nervous that you might have.
Yeah, exactly. We see it in fair lending areas as well. Lot of challenges in those. Great point. Rod, you want to run that?
Yeah, for us, I mean, one of the things we're thinking a lot about these days is how to establish the value of various data assets, really putting a valuation on it. For us, as a manufacturer in the CPG industry, right, we have access to first-party data, second-party, third-party data. And all of those really needs to have sort of at least an implicit, if not explicit, value established to think about how we invest in those. First party is obvious, but when you think about second party data, that we're able to sort of maybe engage in data sharing with retail partners or with suppliers. Think about data sharing. How do we really establish what the mutual benefit is for that data sharing activity? How we're going to really put that data to work? And then third party data, commercial data assets to us is a very big part of our investment is in this entire space, right? And so, up until now, there's not really been a great way other than what did we pay last year, right? Or, what can we sort of compare this to versus other investments in terms of the cost of that data. And it goes beyond just what we sort of pay the data provider, but how we then go ahead and make that available to our associates, how we integrate it into other systems and with other data sets. So I'd say that's a huge challenge for us. As we build out this entire practice, we've thought about our users of data sets and we think about segmenting our associates into, the spectrum of data consumers all the way to data scientists, right? In the middle, maybe you have something like data, data explorers or data navigators. And these are people that are pretty handy with point and click tools like Alteryx, but they're never going to write Python code, right? And so that's a real meaty group. And so we think a lot about which of these segments are going to be impacted by this data acquisition, how will they put it to work, and again, really how do we establish the value of it and really drive our decision and our planning going forward based on evaluation. We've not solved for it. We've not heard that, it's really been solved in a great way. But, we keep plugging at it and we've made some progress, but still a lot of work to do there.
Yeah, makes sense. And great point. I think about traditional industries. I started my career out of college working for the Walt Disney Company in financial planning analysis, and they're in a world of traditional assets or really well-established notions of even discount rate by asset type if you're building a road or a bridge or a hotel or whatever type of various property. And for those mature industries, so much thought has gone into thinking about how to value each component, how to value and think about the value of a new investment in each of those areas. And to your point, we're just not there yet, with this new frontier of data, given the mass investments that are being made. It's clearly a lot still needs to be done there. Great, that's helpful. Rachel, you want to run next?
Yeah, I'd say, in addition to what Joe said about balancing the risk versus availability, that's a huge challenge that we have. We've got a lot of different departments in various stages of sophistication with their data collection, and a lot of them have chosen technology that's going to work for them while only really taking into consideration their context and the problems that they need to solve. And so then as we're moving towards, for instance, F&F has always been a Microsoft shop. We've just migrated the vast majority of our IT systems onto Azure. So we all know that ultimately we're going in this direction, but everybody's sort of at a different place. And so, I've been lucky enough to have a very large data project that uses public records data that we've been able to just put into Azure because there's no PII or MPI that's not already available online or from a county website. Now, where does the business value come from, though? It's combining that with other siloed databases in the company. And so while we've got this dream of everything's going to be available to everybody, how do we make sure that we understand the security, waiting for, waiting for some of the tools to catch up as well. The Microsoft Azure suite of tools is constantly being developed and changing. So, when you're at that frontier, you're almost a little bit farther ahead in vision than what you'd really be able to execute or would want to without the ground sort of changing underneath you. So that's what I'd say is our biggest issue or challenge right now.
Yeah, makes total sense. And your point is well taken. That one of you, especially in larger organizations, you have teams that have access to these really rich sources and pools of data, but oftentimes the way they're thinking about what they capture and what they put focus against is very narrowly within the lens of how they're going to use it, and the broader implications and the broader value is not seen. And we see so many organizations that are building these data assets that later, years later, they realize, wow, the asset itself has value. And while components may not be monetizable on an external basis, others could be the foundation for building new product or just directly monetizing. And if had they been built in a way to support that, or were, like you said, where they built in those very narrow ways. Okay, great. Juan, you want to take that next?
My idea is very similar to what Rachel was mentioning and Rod mentioned before, is that especially now we have a bunch of projects in COVID, and in some way, today there's a huge amount of silo data that could be used for learning insights, and you have probably every single research lab in the world to try to help contribute to the problem of COVID. Correct? Like, we're now talking about, well, we are giving for granted that there will be a vaccine, and we're giving for granted we're going to solve the problem. We just don't know that. Basically, in many ways, we haven't, like, this problem hasn't been solved, and there's not even a good reason to believe that we're gonna be solving it soon. So, so the question is, how can you make a lot of that data available in the world for researchers to work on it, so we can actually find an easier way? You could, like, and this is just one problem, but in general, especially in the medical world, in the data that is collected in the medical world, there's a significant amount of privacy issues, and that's the main reason why it's very difficult to share data. At the same point, you have the idea that, well, if you have researchers that have access to the data, you could actually help save lives, basically. So how do you deal with that main issue? And we've been investing a lot in privacy preserving technology to try to have the good of both worlds. Like when a lot of the open data initiatives started back 20, 25 years ago, like, there was this panacea of everybody's gonna go and share the data. And then suddenly, for every one of these open data set stories, there was like these really bad stories on how people de-anonymized the data, and now privacy of the individuals, people lost their jobs. There's like there's many stories where people have tried to do the right thing for sharing data, but unfortunately, there will be always people to find ways to de-anonymize it, and again, anonymizing data is very difficult. And that's why the right investment in privacy preserving technology, including differential privacy, including synthetic data, in a way that we can have the best of both worlds, where organizations can share the data and individuals can find the insight from the data without affecting the privacy of the individuals in the data set, basically. So that's a huge challenge we have, and we fully agree that privacy needs to be taken care, that's for sure. At the same point, we also agree that a lot of those insights can help save lives. So if we can make an investment to actually have the both worlds, basically, like so that would be amazing for society. We also, as a society, need to invest in ways to provide the right incentive for organizations to share data, because right now, it happens a lot of times in academia. Is like I invested a huge amount of money to create these amazing data sets, and the reason why I'm not going to share it is because there's no incentive for me to share it. Right? Like, I want to sit on top of this data set and write all the publications I can against the data set. But if I give it to you, then suddenly you're going to write those things. I'm not going to get anything. And on top of that, I have a risk that maybe there's some privacy that someone will de-anonymize, and at that point, I will actually have a problem. So again, we need to invest as a society. We need to invest in privacy preserving technology, but also in finding ways to create the right incentive for people and organizations to share data. So.
Yeah, Yeah, great point. I mean, that tension, as you said, that massive tension between the potential to save lives, have just massive economic impact within business, and then that fine line around privacy is one that will be a long time struggle that we're all working to solve. Excellent. All right. Well, maybe we shift gears to the next question. I think one of the common struggles that I see is companies dealing with outdated data, data that becomes stale in essence. So much work goes into these active initiatives around building data lakes, ingesting data, capturing data, particularly when it comes to bringing in external data. And yet much data has a limited shelf life. So some of this, I would say, in a lot of ways, the recent economic shifts where information that was true has changed dramatically. Information about businesses and just, are they open? Are they in business? Are they active? Are they growing? Are they shrinking? So much of what many of us view as foundational basic information about companies has just made a phase shift or changed direction even. Talk to me, if you could, about some of the strategies you've implemented or that you plan to implement even to keep information fresh, and how you deal with that issue. Because a lot of folks, I think, they're prepared to do the big lift for a project, but then don't always think about the continuous aspect of it's not just a one-time lift. And perhaps we'll kind of start moving through on a one shifted basis. So maybe Rod, if you can start us off on this one.
Sure. Yeah. The idea of outdated data is one that we face daily. And, for us, a lot of times it's because we had a user ask for a data set, they put it to work, they used it, and then they didn't need it again for a while, right? Or for whatever reason, the need for it isn't as frequent in some of the other data sets, and it kind of, again, gets stale. So we've got two things in mind. One we've implemented, one that's still in the works, but the one that we've implemented is essentially, and we use a metal chart for all of our data assets that sit in our data lake: gold, silver, bronze, right? And what that refers to is a lot of different things about how much validation processing there is on that data set versus just sort of the idea of a data lake of just, dumping a data set, a raw data set into the lake. Some data scientists asked for it, we went and got it, we put it in there, it's bronze, right? It's not one that we put a lot of time after we source it into the data lake for that data scientist. And then if you go to the other extreme, the gold one is where, we have dedicated IT resources, making sure that, there's data validations, data checks, data load checks. All the transformations have been well defined and documented, and this data set's well documented in our wiki. Right, so that's sort of the metal chart that we have for each of our assets, and really upon acquisition of a new data set, we review, like, where does this one need to be? What's the plan for it, and to get us started or for the long term. So that's the one we've implemented that works really well, right? Because that's something we can communicate to our data community, and sort of they know when to exercise the proper amount of caution, right, when using that data set. I think the one that we're still implementing is the idea of data captains, which is people on the business side, not in the IT side, but in the business side, that are responsible for the particular data asset, right? And they are owning the wiki entry, right? They are partnering with IT on the update frequency. Do I need a different transformation? So again, they are sort of representing the entire business for that data set, and really are the voice of the customer from the business side to make that data set as useful as possible. We have that for a few data sets. We'd like to put it in place for all of them. And really there's that single point of contact for really the true business context of how that data should be used, and kept up to date, right? And so we can make good decisions there about, is this the one that we want to invest resources to keep up to date? Are we okay with sort of having an old version there that we only update it when needed, use those resources elsewhere? And maybe we put it in a longer term storage, part of our data lake that's cheaper, It takes longer to get it back out, but it's a place that we could put it that we know it's there, but we don't have to access it every day. And so that data captain would be the idea of sort of making those recommendations back to the broader community.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, especially as the organizations confront the idea of large, really large data investments, and in some cases, companies have legacy data investments that are recurring. Not just data they bought 20 years ago, but it's the data they've been buying year after year for 20 years, and where there isn't necessarily an assigned business owner. Maybe there's a contract owner, in procurement or otherwise, but there's not necessarily a business user owner, and that continual re-interrogation of, is this worthy, and is it worth this level of investment, is it or less or more, makes a lot of sense. Okay, great. Rachel, do you want to go next here? Hey, Rachel, I think we still have you on mute. Sorry.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, so I in our group, in general, the idea is that whatever the source system is, that's going to be the master record set. That's going to be almost by nature an up-to-date data set. And then anytime you're taking a copy of that, that's when you're worried about some sort of out-of-date, sort of a snapshot actually going stale when you're doing this type of analysis. And so early on when we're doing our data science programs, it is, like Rod was saying, balancing what's the investment towards putting some sort of an automated update or automated feed in between the systems versus just having somebody, say, run a report or dump some data once a month. So a lot of times early on when we're in the discovery phase for some of these projects, we'll go ahead and have manual data pulls done by a person, but as soon as that viability of the project starts to get proven out, we start designing for that end result state in mind immediately. As early as possible, can we start examining automated connections? Can we start trying to tool everything for the eventuality where you're going to have some sort of an automated data feed? And so then once you have that set up and people have been thinking about it for a month or two duration of the project, it's actually almost less investment because everybody's already on board and you don't have to have this huge scramble of use case analysis and business analysts and all these other things. So trying to get sort of in a more agile development from this data availability standpoint and sort of the steward of the data. We're still, we don't necessarily have a lot of the teams that more mature organizations end up with from a data perspective. And so, we're able to sort of play it a little bit light on that side of things. So yeah, I think for outdated data, it's really just a matter of design early for being able to get that on-demand connection so that the data scientists are able to refresh their own data without putting a burden on additional resources elsewhere in the organization.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. We, as an ML-centric company in the early days, before even our own core ETL was automated, we'd have those moments where a data science team would say, hooray, like we figured it out, we solved it. And we'd say, that's great. Now, can you reproduce it every single month? And they said, well, it took 3 months to create it. So, and essentially the reproduce would be another 3 months, and not enough thought had necessarily gone into if this works, we're going to want to redo this. So your point is well taken, which is, doing the innovation with that in mind, but then staging the investment in automation only at the point where it's something you're actually going to want to do again. Okay, great. Juan, you want to go next?
Yeah, so I do agree, and one concept that I think is important is what we call data on data. Is that, for example, big majority, independent type organization, but if you run statistics on access to the data set, like 80–90% of the data that is stored or collected in a company usually is never accessed again, basically, correct? Like that's the bulk of the, and there's I work in Bing.com for a long time. It's like of course, data is the driver of the whole business, correct? Similar to Google's data. But the bulk of the signal gets collected from very tiny amount of features, basically. And And those features need to be extremely important. You need to make sure that you continue collecting, and the quality of that data is really important. When you have big organizations and you have different teams in charge, they will usually treat data, every single data source or table is as important for them, basically. So have clarity, and I love what Rod was mentioning about the concept of bronze, gold, and silver. It's like, have clarity on what data is more relevant and what data is more important, and also run statistics on data and see, well, you know what, like, nobody has access to this whole table in 4 years. Like, do we really think that we should spend a huge amount of effort? And it's not only the storage cost. The storage cost, luckily enough, storage costs have been reduced significantly. The main cost is to have people looking at that, looking at the alerts, whether the data load or not, spending amount of effort basically on the automation. So it's only going to get worse, correct? Like historically, the companies collect more and more and more data, and there's more process and there's more cost for even maintaining the data. So having a good understanding of what data is important or not is crucial for organizations.
Yeah, makes so much sense. And you're right. The default for a lot of folks is to view, especially those who are not the actual business users of the data, that it's very easy to slip into this mindset of viewing all the data in this uniform way, of it's all equally important. And even in some cases, we see data science driven orgs striving toward academic ideals of completeness just for the sake of their own their own compulsiveness, and that is often at odds with business outcomes. Okay, great, good stuff. Joe, you want to?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts to
off on this topic.
The points that people have brought up, I think, have been great. Concept number one is, I think that one of the things that creative companies are doing to keep their data fresh is crowdsourcing and asking their customers and community to do it for them, right? So if you want to know if somebody's moved, the best way to do that is ask them. You know, there was a time in 1995 where we would rely on Dun & Bradstreet and Axiom and third-party sources for everything. And if you're clever, you can get better updates of that data. And that's kind of addresses your point about how do you stay connected to the community in a real way. Now, the other thing is about how we use data. The concept of gold, silver, bronze, great points. You know, one of the things that people don't quite fully always grasp in analytics is that there's a difference between what we might consider big data and fast data. And, you know, big data would be, how do I start to go and look at years of data, trends, you know, years of stuff, and try to figure out if there's a pattern in there, separating out the signal from the noise. And generally speaking, what I would argue is that exercise doesn't require super low latency data to do. You're looking at something that was over years. Now, what really does is when you start to employ that method, and I like your point that you just brought up about, like, well, I hope that you can do something with this once you find it. But at that moment that you want to make a decision, and you need to make sure that that data is fresh for the scoring of that moment. I mean, we can all relate to that moment on Amazon or Netflix where some decision is made right there on our behalf. So some algorithm was baked, you know, a month ago for us for waiting for this very moment. And at that point, I think we need to start to think about there being a sort of latency spectrum. You know, if you think all the way down to microseconds with algorithmic trading, that moment is gone. So you better recognize the condition and act, to real-time scoring of a customer, to a monthly dashboard and financial close. So thinking critical about the use case of that data, and not just jumping through hoops to make everything perfect and current and replicated. Certain data will need to be replicated in near real time. It will, or in real time, right? But I think that kind of the sifting through the use cases to figure out how it will be used will save you a lot of energy on the back half.
Yeah, makes so much sense. And I think that's well said. Nothing I can add to that. Okay, great. So you raised a point. You brought up Dun & Bradstreet and some of the sources that in a historical context, a lot of organizations have relied upon to access data, and whether it's consumer data to support B2C use cases or data about businesses to support core B2B use cases. If you could talk and share about how, to the extent you can, about the role of third-party data, and really what are the biggest chunks of third-party data? If you're comfortable talking about specific data sources, people always find it most helpful to hear about specifics. If you're more comfortable talking about conceptual buckets of firmographics or technographics or whatever it may be, that's okay as well. But talk, if you could, about primary data sources and then how they're managed, because Rod, you mentioned obviously a ton of first-party data in your business, a big role with third-party. All of us are progressively seeking more and more third-party data in pursuit of completeness and perspective and usable data and data that's been pre-sanitized and pre-blessed and in so many other ways from a compliance standpoint. So, Rachel, if you could start us off on this one, and we'll go around in that same sequence.
Sure. Yeah, this is perfect. The data set that I've been really focused on this last couple of years is a very large third-party data set handled by Black Knight, Inc. And this is the consolidated public records for the entire country. And so we've, over the last couple of years, worked on getting a single source data feed from Black Knight for this bulk public records download, and then we're distributing that internally within our company to see those efficiencies. So we don't have each group going to Black Knight and standing up their own integration, and we manage that internally. It's great because they handle any screen scraping they need to do, they handle any actual keying off of document images they need to do, they handle all of the integrations with each of the different counties across the country, which you can imagine is just a gigantic collection of integration points that we no longer have to handle. So, that's the giant benefit of it. Unfortunately, they really see themselves as a pass-through point of ingestion for this county data. And so a lot of the mistakes that we might find, whether they were at the county level originally and passed through by Black Knight, or sort of, done by some of the keyers at Black Knight themselves, they're dealing with so much volume that there's now this question of, okay, to what extent do we want to push on the third party to clean this data and to make it even more usable and more valuable, or how much of that do we bring in-house to then essentially, add an additional layer on top of this data asset that we're purchasing and making it more valuable. So if everybody has access to the public records data as Black Knight presents it, but then we have our own special way of cleaning it up and giving it our special, something else and adding that value, perhaps that's enough to then turn around and create even new data products off of that, or offerings that give our company the edge. So I'd say that's sort of, a really good indication of how you can even use large accessible third-party data and then try and figure out how do you turn that immediately into business value. Another thing that we've done is some of the data that we get from Black Knight is a real-time feed only. But since we are storing absolutely every piece of data that we've purchased from them, immediately we're creating data assets through the history of what we've downloaded. So for instance, assessment data, assessments of properties, anybody who goes to Black Knight can only see exactly the current assessment today. But over time, and as our integration matures with them, when we get that history, we'll have this temporal record of the assessment history as well, which could be very, very valuable as an organization.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And that fundamental tension of how much can we buy that meets the general needs of large, broad set of buyers versus our very specific needs. And how much is realistic to push onto someone else, and where is their business advantage in doing it internally versus even if you can get the third party to do it at cost or not. Okay, great. Juan?
Yeah, so the bulk of the work we do right on my lab is mainly on open data or data sets that are third party data sets. In different, so in the case, for example, in AI for health, we've been working a lot with the CDC has this amazing open data set that I think is kind of unique in the world, that has every single child that was born in the US for the last 25 years, basically. So we work a lot, and our main area of research in for that data set is SIDS, that's Silent Infant Death Syndrome. And so for us has been a game changer. Like without that data set, we wouldn't be able to do work. So I want to congratulate CDC to have such a thing, basically. In the case of AI for Earth, the bulk of the work we do is with satellite imagery. And this is satellite data sets these are open data sets that have usually low resolution type of satellite imagery, usually 10 meter, 15 meter, 20 meter resolution, basically. And we work also with third parties like Maxar that has high resolution, like 30 centimeter, like a pixel is the equate of 30 centimeter. So we do a bunch of work on that. So I think the learning so far is that when you don't have, the difference with that is that when you don't know how the data is collected, especially in the case of the CDC data sets, or it's less problematic in satellite imagery, is that you don't know if there was any bias introduced at the data collection layer. For example, we will find things like, well, if a child dies in the first day of life, there's a bunch of questions that are not asked or are asked different. You will find things that are interesting, but not necessarily true because of a bias that was introduced during the data collection phase. So, for example, you will see that probably like finding someone that a child will die, if there's a bunch of fields that are unknown, those fields will have a lot of predictive power, not because they have any value, but because they didn't collect the data and that bias was introduced. So that for us reminds us that is very important to have always working with medical doctors to have an understanding of what the data is really saying, and really assume that every single field that is collected has some bias, and you need to find that bias before you try to find that there's that you have amazing predictive power whether a child will die or not, basically based on what the model is telling you.
Yeah, great point. That just as we, so many organizations build these massive dependencies on third-party data, is remembering that you need to be very aware of the data you're looking at, and still willing to scrutinize it and see the places where, while it's more convenient, certainly there's places where it may or may not be right, and adjust accordingly. Okay, great. That's helpful. Joe, you want to?
Yeah, I have two thoughts. I think Juan's point about open data sources is a really good one. And, I think that the US government has been quietly doing a really good job of trying to harvest and make data available. So the US was, we had a very earlier adopter of a CDO. DJ Patel was a CDO almost 10 years ago. There is now a federal data strategy, and every single agency is obligated to name and staff a CDO position. And what that's doing is that data.gov has become a go-to source for different sources, and that will become even better. And if you think about COVID, without the CDC and the Johns Hopkins and all these people of the world giving data, imagine where we would be. I mean, it's bad enough without the kind of, but we certainly don't seem to be suffering from lack of public information. So that's kind of the public side. And I think that we all need to probably think about municipalities of all kinds, states, cities, towns, getting that same kind of rigor, putting data out into the world and relying on the citizenry to make sense of it. Do we need a stop sign in town? I don't know. What does the data suggest about accidents? And that's a kind of whole different kind of culture that you want to create around, the citizen data scientist. So I think that's a very cool development. And there are cities, especially on the West Coast, that have really embraced that I think are way ahead. The second thing that I would say is, so that's kind of at the macro level. At the micro level, there was this great article that was posted in the MIT Journal in 2013 where they said, the world of data is doubling every 2 years, and we use less than 0.5% of it. And it's happened. Like it's almost like Moore's law. It's happened, and studies from the IDC show the same thing. Why? Well, that's because everybody out there is creating data and no one's using it. Like, why does Fitbit exist? Why do those heart rate monitors exist? Why does Garmin exist? It's for the collection and dissemination of data. And each of us needs to start to think about how those data sets can be employed in an ethical way within the context of what your business is. So that Garmin information might be super helpful in the healthcare context, might be super helpful in an insurance context. And I think that there's a certain kind of critical thinking where we need to start to look out at all of these little companies that are generating torrents and torrents of really meaningful and very specific information, and introduce it into kind of these analytic studies that might prove some correlation and value in other aspects of what businesses are doing.
Great. Yeah, spot on. Makes so much sense. Okay, great. Rod?
Yeah, those are all some great points. And look, we could talk about this for hours, and feels like I do talk about this for hours most days. Because we actually put into place a senior data strategy lead on my team for this particular reason. And just to complement some of the other things that have been said, the angle that I'll take is around commercial third-party data sets. And one of the things that we really try to do is make sure that we're aware of the innovators and disruptors in the space, and nurture them, and sometimes make some pretty big bets on what we see as innovators in the space. So I'll give you the example, in the manufacturing world with, fast moving consumer goods, sold in grocery chains and big box chains. The Nielsen's and the IRIs of the world have a well-established place in that data ecosystem, right? For good reason. And of course, we and most other CPGs have been partnering with them, in many cases, decades upon decades, right? Of really strong partnerships. So figuring out a way to sort of give them some space to innovate, right? To give them some space to try something new and to take some chances and to partner with them on that is something that we're really working hard to do and to make them feel comfortable with it. And there's discomfort on both sides, right? Part of my job is to make the data available for the people inside of Coca-Cola that need it. And trying something new sometimes is scary, and the change in management around that is something that we spend a lot of time on. I would also say the disruptors that are outside of those legacy providers, right? Making sure we're staying current on them, what they're up to, where we see value, where we see the opportunity to jump in and shape where they're headed. If you think about the providers I just described, and then you think about providers that are maybe trying to get to the same information through a completely different channel that lets consumers take control of their own data, like receipt capture. Image recognition on receipt capture data, whether it's paper receipts or whether it's virtual receipts, like that's an innovation that's coming along. It's coming along really nicely. There's viable commercial offerings in that space right now that we are taking advantage of. It was a big shift, right? It was a big risk to jump in and shift some of our business processes to point at those data sets versus the legacy data sets, but one that's paying off for us. So, you could look at, Slice Intelligence, which was recently acquired, Numerator, some of these innovators that are out there. Really, we are dedicated. We've dedicated some of our resources to stay current with those and to, again, partner and try to nurture those efforts because, it just pushes the whole thing along that much faster if we can do that.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, as you all know, I run a data company that in many cases is seeking to displace work that legacy vendors are doing, and having built product that's based in the data advantages, based in core capabilities in NLP and machine learning and crawling and interlacing in many cases what people perceive as more fragile leading edge technology to produce a better quality data asset. Off the conversation I can see has changed even over the last 6.5 years since we really started this business, from one at the beginning of folks just presuming that what they've been buying for 20 years is as good as it gets, to more of an open-mindedness about there may be a better way, right? And a lot of the conversations I have with people are about, two goals. One is, change the way you think about what's possible with data, right? Because for a lot, you guys are obviously on the more progressive end of where data professionals are, but there are many people, as you guys know, especially within bigger organizations, where the question hasn't been asked in many years. And then the second is just test. It's just prove it through test, fire test it and see if it's true, because there are a lot of really interesting things being done across the landscape that just weren't possible before. Things using through the application of deep learning and others to clean and create and complete data. All right, I'm mindful of time. I think we have time maybe to get through one more question. And I know, one of the common themes that comes up that folks always ask about is, how to improve foundational data, right? The data, Juan, you mentioned there's some subset of data that, whether it's the 10 or 20% that's getting access frequently, others on the call have mentioned Rod, you talked about the data that deserves data captains, and real stewardship for the data that matters most, the foundational components. Can you talk about some effective strategies for improving the quality of it? And whether it's methods or processes internally, whether it's sourcing or otherwise, It's something that people are always trying to figure out, how can I be better about it? I have a set of things that I know work. I worry about breaking those, but what could I and what should I be doing to actually change the quality and performance and reliability of that data itself for my users? And maybe Juan, maybe you could start us off on this one.
So what I'm going to talk a little bit about the process. Of course, any engineering effort on investing data, on trying to find outliers, all of that will always be great. But from a company perspective, what has worked really well is start distributing it, make it public. Like you are like the data that is being used today for COVID, for example, has improved because as soon as it is public, you will get scrutiny, and you will get questions on why on earth we have this state that doesn't have any deaths for the last 3 weeks, when you were like, and people start asking questions like the same happens internally in a company. Like, you've been collecting the data is not perfect, and because it's not perfect, you don't want to share with the stakeholders. Like, share it. Like, start asking questions, because if it's not important and people don't ask questions, nobody cares. Like, and if people start taking decisions on that, people start arguing like, why you're saying this. Like, so it looks a little like counterintuitive. Like, why would you share data that is not perfect? Like, you know it's not perfect. It's because you want to have those discussions. You want to have people arguing why it's not right, basically, because that will help prioritize and give enough resources to improve the data. No data is perfect. No data will ever be perfect. And we also need to be careful. So like no matter what data set out there, you will always have problems on the data set. But again, as long as the signal is still there, as long as the noise that the data set is not generating, is not biasing one result in one way or the other, that random noise will not affect its decision making. And that's another thing that people need to take care. It's like, yes, the data set is not perfect, but the signal will highly likely still be there. So that's my view.
Yeah, no, fantastic point. It's funny, right? We all think about, right, light's the best disinfectant, and it's easy with people who work with and creating data tend to be perfectionists, to your point, and they don't want to expose it until it's perfect. And even when they think it's perfect, it's not perfect. So the sooner the better, because often the challenges are these fundamental things that maybe only a business user can see, and at scale to a data scientist or a creator of data, they may not even hit the radar. So yeah, that's great point. Okay, Joe, we'll go around the.
So let me kind of throw out what might be obvious to people, but we here are data-loving nerds, right? And we could talk about data all day long, but most of our business stakeholders don't want to. And so I realized that I only have a couple of shots to fire, where I can really rally people, and I better make sure that they count. So the first order of business is I've given up on all data quality a long time ago. We go for the data quality that matters, that someone's going to care about, that somebody, the C-level suite, is going to get bummed out about it. So it better be something against a key KPI or a key decision that's made in a customer interaction or something like that. And so first of all is pick your battles. The second thing that I would say is very rarely is a data problem anything but a process problem that created that data in the first place. So I'll share a little dirty secret here. We have a whole lot of duplicate customers in our systems. I'm sure you guys don't. I'm sure all your customer data are all clean and everything. But one of the symptoms of that is we have a compensation plan that disproportionately rewards new business over renewals. That's a curious thing. So guess what our sales reps do? They create duplicate customers just so they can boost their comp. And so if you kind of look at things like that, if you follow the bouncing ball, I think that cleaning data after the fact is like cleaning up a river when you haven't stopped the pollution, right? There's a factory dumping stuff into the river. It's hopeless to clean it up. Stop the pollution. Follow the process back for the things that you matter. Pick your battle, and then go fight the process and policy battle to make sure the data gets in there the right way to measure something that a CEO or a CFO or a COO cares about. Other than that, you're just kind of whistling data words into the air, is my experience.
Yeah, it's a great point, especially if the data, like you're saying, is something that's produced anew on a constant basis. Ignoring the process problems and trying to do cleanup through deal desk or post processing or whatever it may be is you never ever catch up. makes so much sense. Okay, Rod, you want to go next?
Yeah, a couple of quick thoughts here. The first one I think is pretty obvious and probably conventional in the sense of master data management, right? And make sure you're investing appropriately there, and that data quality is one of the KPIs for that effort, right? Not just data governance, but data quality, and being clear about the difference between those things, right? And the investments that you need to make. The second one, which is a thing that that I love that we're doing, and it's about growing and nurturing our data, what we call data fluency inside the organization. I use data fluency instead of data literacy because I think it's friendlier to say data fluency, but we want more people to be data fluent, right? Whether you want to say citizen data scientist or however you want to describe that, we're trying to make everyone more handy with data, more hands-on with data. And again, one of the key benefits there is sort of the data quality will get better, right? You now have more people looking at the data at a more granular level, more often, pushing it harder, stretching it in new ways, doing different things with it, and finding stuff is wrong with it, right? And identifying that for you. So again, we see a lot of benefits, obviously, with this whole data fluency effort that we have underway. But we have explicitly called out that, by design and by definition, you have more people looking, therefore your quality is going to get better by default. So that's been an effort that we've had underway and has really worked well for us.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Excellent. Rachel?
I don't think I have a whole lot more to add beyond what's already been said. But definitely this idea of having a mindset shift of saying, we can't work on a data set until it's perfect versus going in knowing it's not going to be perfect, embracing that, finding the signal within the noise, and leveraging different data sets against each other to help clean and make those data sets more robust. There was a project I was involved in very recently where the person who had originally looked at this data set in and of itself said, oh, it's terrible, I have PTSD, us bringing this data set back to life and looking at it, there's nothing you can get out of it. But he said, but I don't want to discourage you. I said, okay, I won't be discouraged. We go anyway, and just because I had a different data set that was more impartial to measure this dirty data set against, we're able to really extract some interesting signals and some correlations that he frankly thought there'd be no way we'd be able to find. And so, yeah, this theme of the more projects you have on the data, the more people you have looking at it, the more people you have questioning it, and embracing that as part of the data process is very important.
Excellent. Yeah, some really good consistent themes across that, and sometimes, as you said, it's changing culture of organizations, right? Rod, you said just having more people be data fluent. It's even in my own organization over the years, as we transformed into needing to go from being ML centric to equally data centric was forcing people who used to think more solely about the data science to really be looking at the data, and through that to surface the issues that were just fundamental, and then solve them often with data science. But I know this has been a fantastic conversation, and I could talk about this stuff all day. I'd love to keep going for another hour, but I know we're up against time here. Maybe just in a 10-second wrap up, maybe you could share just your thought as we look forward to the next year. Biggest thing you think will change, and it doesn't need to be in the next 12 months, but as you think about this next click of all of our lives as data professionals, biggest thing you think is going to change about the state of data market, the way people use data, expectations they have, just single biggest thing that you think not really part of the common expectation now, but that is ahead of us. And perhaps we can just run around with that. Joe, if you don't mind, we'll start with you.
Today, AI and blockchain are very separate. I think they're going to converge. I think all these questions around PII and privacy and how we store data will invariably introduce blockchain technology, and all of a sudden we need to analyze that stuff, and that's going to be quite a challenge.
Yeah, great point. Rod?
the data sharing aspect is going to be huge, right? I mean, as businesses work together and think about sort of the mutual benefit and the shared value of bringing together data sets from each organization for mutual benefit and really discovering that and being able to measure, it's going to be huge for us as we go forward.
Yeah, great point. Rachel?
For us, it's going to be increasing the technical competency throughout the organization so that you've got a lot more local departments with the tools to actually get value out of their data.
Yeah, spot on. Yep, the tools are becoming more readily available, easier to use, and you want more people using the data. All right, Juan, I know we're up against time here, so maybe we close this out.
Yeah, so I do think that if anything, COVID has helped the world. I do think that the idea of access to silos, especially in the medical world, will improve a lot. They already have improved, like the timeline to get access to some of these data sets for researchers have highly reduced, but I do think that that's something that will change and needs to change, and that will bring a lot of investment in privacy preserving technology. So I do think that that's probably a good outcome for society.
Yeah, agreed. Makes sense. All right, Shannon, I know we are up against time here, so I'm going to let you close it out. But first, I do want to thank everyone here sincerely for making the time to do this, both on behalf of myself and Everstring, but also on behalf of all the charities that I know you're all taking your time to help support. So thank you very much for that.
Yes, thank you all so much. I really appreciate you joining us today. At this time, we'll recognize the charities. Rachel with the Access Fund, Rodney with St. Jude's, Juan with Global Idea School, Joe with Direct Relief, and JJ with the American Breast Cancer Foundation. So thanks again to our partner, Everstring. We hope you have a great rest of your week, and thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Pleasure to meet everyone. Bye.